OBE Journal, June 2017, Part 1. As I focus on my exit from the body last night, it is now 5:15 in the morning, I see myself moving quickly and smoothly, as I did years ago. When I last made a record, that would be around 2004, I think. Maybe a little later. In the book, contained in the book, More Adventures in Eternity. The mechanics of separating the bodies seem to have been smoothed over by then. Not the bumpy ride that it was years before, with all that coming and going and partial exits and getting too excited and coming back into the body, and getting stuck in the window frame or the wall, wiggling about. And that ability still seems to be with me, even though I haven't tracked it that much in the intervening years. And it still seems to be there. So we can certainly skip that particular set of circumstances. And I seemed for maybe, for old time's sake, I'm visiting with my long deceased father, who's sitting comfortably and where he lives and has lived for a good number of years, and asking me what I'm trying to achieve with this particular adventure, he calls it. And I tell him about many other of the experiencers that I have read and absorbed and also broadcast on YouTube, such as my high-achieving colleague in England, Jürgen Zhu, whose books have inspired many of us. And just to give Jürgen his due, and there are a number of other people who have emulated his achievements in various smaller ways. And we attempt, all of us, I think, to build a bridge to the other world for all to experience and see and hear, and to help marry the two realities in a more permanent way. And that's not as if they haven't been married already and have been for, an eternity, but the vibrational basis for each plane is drawing closer. It has been for, I would say, at least a couple of 100 years. That's just a quick rough estimate. Now, he's, as I say, been settled in the afterlife for many decades, and has been joined by my mother in the last decade or so. And a good deal of the incarnate blood family that he was with is there. In fact, many are. And he has his own life and pursuits there that I'm well familiar with, and lives in a community that he's quite happy with, as many are. Communities are well established there, just as they are here. And I think this has all been established, by myself and others in our writings, but it should be just quickly referenced. And he listens as I try to explain what I'm trying to do with this, really nothing that revolutionary, just bringing my own journey up to date for those that might be interested, and collaborating with the achievements of others, as I said, Jürgen and many others who, if they don't actually write books, they certainly publish their experiences on various Facebook groups that I belong to. Many people doing retrieval work, and by retrieval work I mean coming across lost and confused souls in various levels of the afterlife. Usually the lower levels, and helping them sort out their confusions and move on to a place that is more deserving of their how shall I say, journey requirements, rather than tossing about in the confusions of guilt and sorrow and belief systems. So all this is accessible to those who wish to pursue it, whether they want to actually read of others' experiences or practice up themselves. And that's essentially what I'm doing, providing more material for people to chew on. And you know who you are, my friends, Todd amongst others, and the great pioneers like Robert Monroe, and you know, the many, they are legion, as they say about biblical times. So, talking with my father in a comfortable and relaxed way, and he wishes me well, and wants to talk a little bit about British politics. He's has been British in many incarnations, including his last, and the whole seesaw ride of Brexit and the recent election and the number of terrorist attacks and the possibility of Scottish referendum. Then it's been cancelled, and independence and European Union status. He's interested in all these things, and we discuss them almost exactly as you would do here on Earth. People in the spirit world have insights into these things, but that doesn't mean they know exactly what's going to happen. They do not. There's always free will. There's always countries can do anything they want. The countries in Europe, for example, that wish not to have immigrants and have been challenged by the EU hierarchy to take them, and who are saying they will not be blackmailed. That was yesterday's news. That is known to them, and they wonder when those countries will bend and take some refugees and enter the world of compassion for the other and help the long planned integration of the tribes and nations. We can perceive this here intellectually as living citizens, living concerned citizens on the earth. But I believe the interested parties in spirit can see a little farther ahead than us, as is often the case with spirits. They can't see the ultimate solution particularly, but they can see the forward movement a little more clearer than us, and he sees that. And you know, I nod in agreement, feeling that I can see it myself, and we, you know, discuss the ramifications of those perceptions. On other visits, I have informed him or reminded him, or you know, of matters that I wrote of in More Adventures in Eternity, where I perceived myself splitting into 3 or 4 orbs, spirit beings, orbs, that move into different phases of experience in simultaneous time, and do what they feel they need to do in the various planes. And there are, four of me, or four beings that can identify as Gordon if required. And given my writings and teachings, which many people do, I'm not the only one that conducts classes in the spirit plane or attends them, as many experiencers know. But he was interested in how I would communicate the complexities of these at least four independent beings that can self-identify as Gordon if called upon in any way. They don't only identify as Gordon, but they will if it seems necessary. And as I say, they are independent beings that seem to emanate from the higher self, the monad that I myself emanated from around 1952, although their birth was not a physical birth. Their birth was, as far as I can tell, an astral birth. And that in itself is of interest to many, and it was to me. In fact, it completely threw me for a loop at the time, and it was only a request for a channeling from my friend Jeff in Los Angeles, Jeff Williams, who contacted his spirit guide Samhain and gave me, through Samhain, a detailed understanding and reassurance that these at least four other beings, sometimes it seems like three, sometimes it seems like four, are in fact a reality and not a fantasy of mine. And such as the great usefulness of companions along the way, as my friend David Pierce would refer to them. And I thank Jeff for that still, after all these years. It settled my troubled soul energy at the time, and allowed me to continue on. And with the understanding that the definition of me to continue on, is much sort of looser and vaguer than one would prefer. This whole notion of the single being in the body, exiting as a single being and going places and doing things, is a convenient fiction at best. It's not a lie, but a convenient fiction to further a functioning narrative is what it is. And it's what we have to live with as we move along this path, this timeline, this inner journey to some kind of intuitive grasp of the marvelous and endless mystery that we're bundling about in, of which the troubles of the planet and the citizens of the planet are only a part. The great beyond and marvelousness of the adventure is, of course, what I'm experiencing as I relate this to you in some small fashion, as we don't want to completely lose our identities and become a marvelous nothing in the paradise worlds, well, beyond the paradise worlds, actually. A drop of light in a sea of light. We'll get there eventually. But right now, I'm still an astral being talking to another astral being, my father, who was my father in my past life, sort of in this life rather, and I have known in past lives, in a variety of guises, as he's slowly coming to understand. Astral beings don't always immediately sort of charge down and know all their past lives. Sometimes the experience of passing and getting resettled and readjusted to the greater reality of the astral plane is enough for many, many years. And there is to be no praise or blame attached to any particular soul's progress on that journey. And he is where he is, and he's enjoying it immensely. He had a tough life growing up, in World War One, Depression, World War II period, which was tough for everybody in Europe. Let's face it. After World War One, things were not good, and during World War II, they weren't much better. But that's the life that generation chose, and they all learned from it in many, many ways, as did he. And the hurly-burly of troop placement kept him in India for 6 years, where he saw no action absolutely at all. Caught a number of tropical diseases, learned to eat and cook curry, absorb what he could of Hindu and Muslim culture around where he was, and wait out the war, as the Japanese never showed up. Unlike my Uncle Jim, who went through all the fronts of the war and saw much action, of which he would not speak to me or anyone else that I can gather, but just to point to how things can be so different for men of the same generation in the same place. Although ultimately I think they all learned the same lessons of seeing the self in the other. I do recall my Uncle Jim talking about being in Germany, passing through, maybe not quite at the front, because if he was at the front he wouldn't have time to observe, he'd be fighting, close to the front I would imagine. And he observed the body language and the gestures of German people. And he said to me once, Gordon, they're just like Scottish people. I was astonished to how like they were, or words to that effect. And so I just point to that small detail as a lesson learned by the tribes and nations coming together in conflict, in a forced conflict that they may not have felt for each other one-on-one, as politics and the how shall we say, the push of politics and the threat of extinction makes people go to war. The Germans thought they were going to be crushed by outside forces, and I can certainly tell you the British thought they were. I inherited that mantle. Now, without going into the whole cosmic balance notion of peace and war and fighting and territories and greed and empire building and all that sort of a thing, one can certainly grasp the enormity of all that in the history of the planet, and the evolution of souls on the planet is intimately connected to that, no question. But it's a huge topic, and maybe we'll get to it later. Right now, I'm still with my father on the astral plane. He's asking about the other, parallel Gordons that might be doing things, are doing things, and how would I track them down? And because they are independent beings, I have to sort of knock on their door vibrationally and see what they're up to. And they don't take orders from me, that's for darn sure. They're more likely to be teasing me when I'm out and about. But, and that teasing, I should add, comes from being an astral being and knowing that nothing's really that important. There are tasks to be accomplished, there are journeys to be taken, there is suffering to be alleviated, there is confusion to be redirected and assisted, and there are belief systems, limiting belief systems that can be smoothed out or shattered by how should we say, slightly older souls that can help younger souls through the shattering of that limiting belief system, of which there are many, of course. That is all to be done. and can be done, but it can be done at any kind of a pace. And ultimately, when you're out there in spirit space, it doesn't really matter. Time doesn't matter. It isn't there. It's only here on Earth. And whether someone's suffering is eased in 1 or 2 nights, or 3 months, or 4 years, ultimately doesn't matter. They are suffering, and their suffering is extensive. But if I can quote from personal experience, someone who's lost, trapped, whether it's through victimization and war, or a quote unquote natural disaster, um, volcanoes, earthquakes, etc., floods, etc., etc. Um, when you, after visiting them, several times and encouraging them to A, believe that, hey, you're dead, B, you're not responsible for the other dead, it's not your fault, you can't hang around as a ghost and help them, it's not going to work. Um, and you really should come to spirit world and get settled there. That process that can take quite a long time, or it can be done in 30 seconds. But if it does take a long time, you just accept that fact. And as some of you who have read, classic sort of ghost stories in the ghost literature will know that some ghosts will hang around for hundreds of years. And because they've got a comfort level in their anxiety and fear, and sometimes sort of their delinquency. Those delinquent spirits that like to, hang around and bug people. Those are, that's my furniture, that's my jewelry, hands off. These are my woods, this is my cabin. All the ghost stories, you've heard them all. Those spirits can take a long while too, but ultimately it doesn't matter. It's a big, long universe, and time is endless. And despite all the, how shall I say, disagreements and efforts at sort of marking all that time, has come up recently from the discovery of fossils in North Africa, suggesting 300,000 years, and this type of man, that type of man, and the little bones, and all that sort of a thing. It's of great interest, especially as we pursue our Earth-based science and see it expanding to greater and greater definitions. But it brings up that, as does the arguments over the length of the ancient Egyptian civilization and the time slot in the history occupied by the Atlantean civilization, not to mention the Lemurian one. It all goes back. And so when you see that large grasp, as one does when one's out of body and not limited by textbook definitions and journalistic arguments, one relaxes a good deal more. One realizes it's not as important as earthbound citizens seem to think it is. And whether they're earthbound citizens thinking their family situation and economic situation is terribly important, knife edge excitement, or they're intellectuals pursuing these matters on the mental area and having debates and arguments and the cut and thrust of debate, as they say, and thinking that that's terribly important. It is important, but it's not that important. Cultures rise and fall. Planets come and go. And we've been on this one for a long time. And I know that as I sit here talking to you. I think a lot of you do too. And we just have to get that message across to the others. Anyway, so that sort of teasing, joyful, joking sort of attitude that my colleague spirits have, that I've referred to, that comes of that understanding. You do what you can do, and you have fun along the way, because, hey, you might as well. And that leads me to, I think what happened, oh yes, well, I bid farewell to my father, and typical music fan that I am, I go and visit Richard Wright, former member of Pink Floyd, keyboard player, composer, and a soul that I helped transit when he passed, and that's covered in my some earlier YouTube videos. And he's well settled and quite happy now. And I bring him news of he seems glad to see me. Oh, hi, Gordon. How are things with you? And I say, Richard, you must know. Just yesterday, I saw something on YouTube of a small Italian orchestra, maybe 15 people, with percussion and keyboards, but not really any choir. You know, strings, double bass, oboe, flute, small string section, and they've done a concert perhaps a year ago, doing all of the Pink Floyd album from 1970, Atom Heart Mother, including the 3 songs on the other side that don't always get performed. There are many versions of the full Atom Heart Mother with the full choir. That has been done many times now. And but this is quite new, with, for example, violin and cello taking the electric guitar and keyboard, some of the electric guitar and keyboard parts, and quite a marvelous performance. I just loved it, and I'm excitedly telling Richard about it, and he's very pleased to hear that. The Atom Heart Mother phase of Pink Floyd was of a great love to him. It was a period he really enjoyed. Not that he didn't enjoy the others, but it was a composition he was deeply concerned with. And so I'm relating all of that to him in my enthusiastic music fan fashion. And indeed, it is very good. And it helps establish, and doing the other 3 songs too, including Richard's Summer 68, without vocals, unfortunately. But that would be nice. But to have them done by the orchestral instruments in a smooth flowing fashion makes the whole Atom Heart Mother and 3 songs sweet, including the Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast with the taped kitchen sounds. It makes it all one well, it's not even mini symphony. It's about 50 minutes long, and it's a real triumph, and leads the way to the future of other versions, just in the way that Grieg wrote his piano concerto as a 1-movement fantasy for piano and orchestra, and then some years later added other 2 movements, if I've got my history correct. And one gets to see the replication of growth in music in all forms. And one sees the oneness of rock music with the classical tradition, which is something I've been interested in for many years. And I take great pleasure in it. And, for example, the evolution of John Lord's Concerto for Group and Orchestra. There's many versions of that now. And when it was such a revolution when it came out in '69. And such things give me great pleasure. And as I have alluded to in More Adventures in Eternity a number of years ago, and a little bit on the internet since, the spirit you see here in front of you, before he was born, was intimately involved with the development of a music school. Not as a teacher, just as an idealistic collaborator. And it's on a certain area of the astral plane, and has a mixture of nature forms and with buildings around nature forms, as you can only do in the astral plane, with like giant oak trees growing up in the middle of the building and up through the roof, and people sitting on the big root logs as they wind their way through the soil, and practicing their instruments. It was an attempt to combine nature energies and the energies of, how shall we say, human musical culture. And I discovered this on my own journey many years ago, that I had been involved in this, and was told and was shocked and was like, oh my God, no, you're kidding. And just yet another discovery. So anyway, I have a pleasant time with Richard Wright. He's working on some music. He played me a couple of piano sequences, and that sort of elegantly simple lyricism that he was so good at, whether he was doing a piano solo as he would do in the early days, and then more that sympathetic bedrock of what I would call empathy that he would place behind David's guitar solos. An act of great compassion, I always thought. This negation of the brilliant soloist to be the provider of musical comfort to another soloist who was exploring the realms. And I could argue that one for hours, but I won't. This is not musicology. I'm just visiting Richard Wright. So that was what he played for me, and I was grateful, as I always am. And we shared some small talk about his life and what he is planning on. I'm pretty sure there's a symphony in the works, or an astral plane symphony. He's not one to rush things, but he's working on it, and he has some collaborators there. And he is in contact. Well, we didn't discuss this, but somebody's going to ask. He is in contact with Sid Barrett, and Sid's still leading a very quiet life. He's taking his time to come around to who he wants to be now. As you know, it was a life troubled with mental and physical illness after his initial stab at transcendental glory, which today stands as a wonder, a great wonder, and has been resuscitated by the re-release of all this old Pink Floyd stuff, which Richard knows about and is well pleased with, to see a lot of that early stuff come out, even if it's double versions and live versions of things that are already known. He thinks it's important, and he likes to hear his playing rendered to a greater and more loving audience than was. Well, he says it wasn't really more loving. He said we had a loving audience in the early days, except for maybe that first tour in '67, where people were throwing beers and pennies at them for not playing R&B dance tunes. But he said, but later we had a very devoted and loving audience for many years, and he's still grateful for that. It helped them evolve consciously and with great, what's the word he's looking for, or what's the word he's giving me? Consciously and with great deliberation, he said. We were a struggling band, but we were supported, and we knew it. He's also very glad to see the upcoming release of the new David Gilmour at Pompeii, and celebrating their return to Pompeii, which they did in '71, I guess, as you know from the film. So anyway, we discuss these matters, and he asks how I'm doing and what's going on Earth. He's not that interested. He is a little bit, but not as much as my father, and that's neither here nor there. People are interested in what they're interested in. It hardly matters at all. The world gets on without you, whether you actively jump in the pond and swim. The pond's still there, whether you're lying on the side on your towel or swimming in it. So that's very jolly. Richard seems to live in the astral version of the Mediterranean, sort of like the Greek islands. He was very fond of that when he was alive, and alive on Earth. and he's got a lovely Greek-style house on an island, as far as I can tell. I'm not walking around measuring things. I just know where to find them. That's what happens in the astral plane. You think of somebody and you go to where they live. You don't need to like hitchhike or get on a bus or figure out where you're going. You just go there and you're there. And, instantaneous transfer, yada, yada, yada. So that's what it looks like to me. And he's not talking Greek, although it's very much a Greek landscape. But I think he know if he's talking to souls that lived on the Greek islands when they were physical and then moved to the astral plane version when they're past. He knows how to speak their lingo. He's been there long enough. And of course, as Pink Floyd fans know, he's a lifelong sailor, and he has a couple of yachts. Not even more than two, I don't know. And still takes great, great pleasure in sailing. And I think he still misses his earthbound family. In fact, I know he does. But he's adjusted. He's not terminally melancholy, if people are wondering about that. And he's saying to me rather briefly, do give my regards to those who wish to be remembered, and reassure people that I'm doing very well, thank you. And I'm quite adjusted and do not feel any urge to suddenly return to Earth or feel that I've somehow been cheated by life. I had a good life, a good fulfilling life, and I am having one now. And there is no further sense of loss, although he does often visits in spirit to his friends and loved ones. And sometimes they know he's around and sometimes they don't. And he's okay with that. He understands that people have concerns and things that wrap them up, just as we all do. So I give him a brief sort of rundown on what I'm doing here on this particular venture, and he nods and says, "That's certainly a project for you, Gordon, and I'm sure I'm sure you're up to it," he says. Okay, so I do go on after bidding farewell to my esteemed friend and not quite colleague. I'm not not up to that level of musicality. I'm a fan and a bit of an amateur tinkler, And but would I play one of his solos? I don't think so. No, please, let's not be foolish. But one of many musicians that I'm very fond of, and keep track of when they're over there. As you know, many of them are over there. A lot of you will be thinking of people like Jerry Garcia and Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix and whatnot. And I'm not sure. I don't see them tonight, but obviously this is a little bit planned so that we can illuminate certain areas of my activities, and perhaps that we'll get to that later. And this is only the first of many episodes. So I do leave Richard. Shaking hands in the English gentleman fashion. We haven't changed that much. And off I go. And we're reaching a bit of a time limit here. That's not all that was accomplished earlier tonight. It's now about 5:30 in the morning. And but I don't have endless amounts of time on these videos. So I will return tomorrow, hopefully. Or maybe even sooner. This gets to be a little pressured. So, OBE Journal, 2017, end of part 1.